So, you are going to be looking particularly at the development of character as you read this novel. Robert Louis Stevenson has a very deft hand. The famous British essayist G.K. Chesterton once said of Stevenson, he seemed to pick the right word up on the point of his pen like a man playing spillikins, which is kind of a pick up sticks kind of games. Well, it's that ability to perfectly sketch with just the right words an event or a confrontation, a scene, so that in such a way that the reader learns much more than just what happened. The reader really sees into the characters' hearts and minds and learns to whom it is happening as well. So read with your character chart nearby, or you could do as I do and mark your book and then go back, as Mr. Adler would advise, right? Go back and fill in your character chart afterwards. So here are some road signs for you as you progress through this next week. Chapter 4. The entire chapter, chapter 4, is one long interaction, one scene of adventure with Jim and his mother, and we learn a lot about both of them. Carefully note what this reveals about Jim. By the way, his mother comes off as a pretty brave lady too, okay? But how mature is Jim? How old is he? How strong is he? How brave is he? Is he fearful in the face of disaster? Can he think clearly when he needs to? So chapter 4 is going to tell you a lot about who Jim is at the beginning. Remember, we're still at the exposition of this book. So chapter 4 is going to finish that exposition level so that you can start into really the conflict will be introduced very shortly here, and you will start to see the shape of the adventure to come. Skip over chapter 5, although of course you're going to read it, but you know, my next road sign for you is at the end, the last 2 paragraphs of chapter 6. Note well who Dr. Livesey says he is afraid of and why. That not only characterizes the man that Dr. Livesey is speaking about, and that might surprise you, but it also serves as a little bit of foreshadowing. You know what foreshadowing is? It's when the author kind of shows his hand a little bit and reveals an intention or gives a clue, a little idea of what's going to happen. So there's some foreshadowing in the last couple of paragraphs of chapter 6 when Dr. Livesey reveals who he is afraid of about and what and why. The next chapter, chapter 7, I Go to Bristol. In this chapter, there's a long letter from Squire Trelawney to Dr. Livesey and Jim, and it would be tempting to skip over it, to be honest. Don't, because read the letter, read it carefully, read between the lines. To see what it tells you about Squire Trelawney, what his faults are, and really how good-hearted he is in those faults. I'm going to tell you right now, and you can look for evidence, I believe that Squire Trelawney is the most naive man that goes on this voyage, perhaps more than Jim, okay? He just does not understand the evil that can be in men's hearts at all. So look for evidence, check me on that, see if you think I'm right. In chapter 7. Also at the end of chapter 7, Jim goes back to the Admiral Benbow Inn to say goodbye to his mother before his big adventure, his big voyage. What is up with his reaction when he goes home? Try to figure out what that tells you about Jim. He has a very strong reaction. Then number 8, chapter 8, is our introduction to one of the main characters of the book. At the sign of the spyglass, we meet Long John Silver, the friendly tavern keeper that it will become the ship's cook. Mark well everything that happens in this chapter. This is the most charismatic and appealing person in the entire crew. So watch out. What is the evidence, pro and con? Is he just an honest tavern keeper, or is there something else going on? Stevenson goes out of his way to show how strong and healthy and winsome and gracious and friendly Long John Silver is. But he may or may not mean anything he says or does. So Long John Silver is one of those characters of literature that has become so well known and so well thought of in the way Stevenson sketches him. Long John Silver has a disability. He has lost a leg. Notice how Stevenson even uses that to show how strong and healthy he is, how hardy he is. As you go on reading, chapters 10 and 11 are going to reveal some truth, some news about one of the members of the crew, and see how Long John feels about the squire? How does Long John feel about the captain? How does he hold them in esteem or not? Okay. And then in 12, when everybody finds out what the news is, how do they respond to the impending trouble? Each of these big events reveals not only a piece of the plot line going forward, not only some rising tension going forward, but it reveals so much about the characters that Jim is seeing as role models in his life. Okay. By chapter 14 is another huge chapter. I mean, it feels like I'm mentioning them all, but chapter 14 is big. By the end of chapter 14, Jim Hawkins will fully understand who Long John Silver is. He may not always remember it, but he will never completely forget it. It's a shocking chapter, kind of frightening, certainly for Jim Hawkins. So pay close attention to what happens in chapter 14 as well. I think it's certainly, you could say that it's a turning point in their relationship, in the relationship between Jim Hawkins and Long John Silver. You won't miss it, don't worry. And then the last road sign I want to give you, in chapters 16, 17, and 18, we have a new narrator. It would be easy to miss if you aren't reading the chapter headings. Stevenson has Jim doing one thing, and then he uses the doctor, narrative continued by doctor, how the ship was abandoned. Okay, so he states up here that there's a new narrator, but that would be simple to miss if you're not really reading the chapter headings. So while Jim is doing one thing, Stevenson uses the doctor for just 3 short chapters, 16, 17, and 18, to narrate what is happening with the rest of the crew. So just notice that fact well, otherwise it might be confusing. Okay, that should help you as you read through this week's assignment. You are really going to enjoy this tale. So have a great week, and I will meet you back here next week in the Red Cat's Reading Room.